Okay, recording right now. And we'll wait another 30 seconds and start. How many participants do we have, Mark? Can you check the participants? Oh, we only have 6 right now. Nina?
Students are here, yeah.
How many are we expecting?
There should be 24 and there are just 3, but I called the representative and I hope they will join.
All right, wait just another minute. Got an all-star cast here with Mark in here, and
Yeah. I was late to my meeting yesterday. I just completely spaced. Being President's Day, it kind of threw everything off in schedule.
all right. Okay, so Nino, if you think it's okay, I'll start now. I mean, I've got 6 people here. We're 5 minutes back.
Sure, James. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
All right. So today, we're going to be talking about technical writing. On the surface, it sounds like it could be pretty boring. We added this lecture after about 8 or 9 years of doing this class because it just occurred to us that writing is difficult for most people, and especially for engineers. And there is a significant difference within technical writing to the writing that comes in a novel. And so we thought that it was appropriate to give them kind of the abridged version of how technical writing was different, and thinking that it will help them. And the good news is, if you know the tricks to technical writing, it actually makes it a lot easier to write. So we will be talking about technical writing, studies, and executive summaries. And the takeaway is, the biggest difference is they only know what you show. So the operative word there is show, which is not like you write novels. You don't necessarily write unless it's a picture book or comics. You don't show as much. Okay, so that's what we're going to be talking about. So I need to hit the next one. So I'm working off, there we go. Okay, so we're going to be covering in this, we're going to cover what is technical writing. We're going to cover what exactly is a study. Well, not exactly, but what is a study? Then we're going to go into the executive summary, the typical parts from an industry's perspective of what's in an executive summary. And that is what you see in the white text right there. That's kind of the typical parts. It's not sacred, but those are the typical parts. We're going to go over those one by one. And then we're going to wrap it up with a little bit of figures versus exhibits versus plans, obviously how those are related to technical writing. And then if you get nothing else out of this lecture, I would say that last one, we're going to give technical writing tips and tricks. So if you get nothing else, those last 3 slides that we have, we're going to give you some tips there. Okay. All right, so technical writing is writing that helps users solve problems with technologies and technical and subject matter. That's a lot of words. And what does it mean? I mean, it's just, well, to put it easily, it means that good technical writing just makes complex simple and the customer successful. Even that, and to put it even a different way, is that you just try to simplify things. And I'll use the term dumb it down. I'll use that maybe a couple times during this. And it's very respectful. That's not disrespectful. I can tell you right now, and I'll wrap this up saying that it takes one of the smartest people in the room to dumb something down. It takes the smart people to dumb things down. And I'll kind of hit on that and what that means. And one of my favorite Abraham Lincoln quotes. Okay, so what is a study? Well, a study is basically, all studies are going to have some form of an executive summary. And then they're going to have an in-depth analysis. Okay, so the summary itself with an executive summary is, what is this executive summary? With executive summary, there's 2 words though. And a lot of times when you hear words, you think, what is the operative word? What's the most important word? The unique thing about an executive summary is both of those two words, each of those two words, I should say, are important. They're both hit it. It's a summary. Okay. And it's usually for the executive types. It's for the people that are going to want to read, have the most to read and have the least amount of time. Okay. So an executive summary is just those sections that I mentioned before: introduction, background, purpose, and objective. And we'll go by those one by one. So it has those typical items within the summary, but overall it's a summary. Okay. And then if you look at what the study is executive summary plus the in-depth analysis. Well, what's the in-depth analysis? Well, laughingly, I'd say the in-depth analysis is usually what people don't want to read, but it's the technical writing that we're talking about in this lecture, which is the narrative. And then it also, the whole package of your study has exhibits, calculations, and appendices, typically. Okay. So think NECA. Okay. That's that all of most of your studies are going to have NECA, are going to have a narrative, exhibits, calculations, and appendices. Okay. So again, and that's trying to dumb it down, because it's certainly a study is a lot more complicated than that, right? But I'm just dumbing it down to think, you know, that most studies are going to have those 4 elements. Okay, and this lecture is covering that narrative part. Okay, so we're going to go by these one by one here. Okay. So what is in an executive summary and why? So why is arguably the important part. These are parts, these are sections that are typically an executive summary. Okay. It doesn't mean that they're not all executive summaries. They're a good go by. It's an important thing to remember that when you're doing this project, I'll try not to make this lecture so much on your project because it's on general, but I want to tie it to your project a little bit, okay? It's important to remember that you have several studies in your project delivery. You are going to have, arguably, a water study, a sewer study, a structural study, a geotechnical study, all of those. From the previous slide, they're all going to have an executive summary. But those executive summaries will be focused on that study. So I certainly don't want to hear general stuff when you're doing a sewer study. Your executive summary is on that sewer study, probably pretty brief too. Your entire project also has an executive summary. And at the risk of oversimplifying, your executive summary of your entire project is a summary of the summaries. Okay, so if you have that frame of mind, then you can kind of understand where this is going. So those are the sections that we're going to talk about right there, and we're going to go by one. Okay. Now, by the way, this, as you see on here, this little image, the screen capture here on the executive summary. So that's something that we will provide to you. Okay, as kind of a guide. I'm actually going to go by each one and verbally go through this guide, but you have this guide right here. And in that guide, it's a little small, but you can see that text right there. When you have time to read it, you'll see this is what I'm talking about. That is not an example of an introduction. That is not an example of a background. What we attempted to do is, in the writing part of that, we tried to tell you what you should put in an introduction, what you should put in your findings. And as often happens, what's almost most important, what you should not put in your findings, what you should not put in your background, because that's very important too, to know what you put in and what not to put in. Okay. Okay, so we'll go by these one by one. There's a lot here, so we'll have to go through it fairly quickly. But so the introduction is, you'll notice that I use a little bit of a kind of a motif of text here. I use green, I use red, That's not coincidence, that's strategic. You'll see when I use a green word and when I use a red word. Green is good, red is bad. So avoid something in red, think of the owner as green. And then I'll use check marks as something that you need to do. If it's a bullet, it's just a bullet, but a check mark is something that you should include. So the introduction is, okay, draw the reader's attention. Usually if you're writing it to somebody, the best way to do that is to do the second check mark, is to write it from the owner's perspective. One of the reasons behind that is that the owner by now already gave you what they asked you to do. And people love to be heard. It's a need. They want to know that you heard them. You heard what they asked you to do. So an introduction is a good opportunity to say, hey, this is what you asked us to do. This is what, we love you, and, we're going to stroke your ego. And this is what we heard. So it's from the owner's perspective. It's not, so avoid sharing your perspective or even why you were hired. Now, you do that later in documents, because you were hired for a reason, but not now. Now you're hearing, you may have heard, first we seek to understand, then to be understood. You were hired for your brains as engineers to be understood so that you can explain to them, right? But that's not a time for the introduction. The introduction is a time that you say, this is what we heard. This is what we understood you to tell us. Are we good? Are we good? Do you feel good? That's the opportunity. So state why the project is so important to you. This is an opportunity to say, hey, this is, this is why it's so important to us. So that's what the introduction is. Okay. So if you notice, there's not much engineering in an introduction, right? Okay. So background, I'm going to go through these one by one. Background. And by the way, like I said, that example is going to tell you written. I did my best to write what I'm saying right now in that example template we gave you. So what's the background? All right, the background provides a little project history. Most of this is given to you in the RFP or from, maybe a little bit of research. Most of this, so a little bit on the project history, a little of the existing conditions, why the project is needed. Again, there's not much civil engineering here, is there? Not much. There's a background. You're just setting the table. There's a little bit more of letting them know that you heard them. You heard why it's so important for this project. You need this bridge project because for years, when houses catch on fire, it takes 14 minutes for a fire truck to get there. With this bridge, it'll take 3. That's why this particular project is so important. That's why you need this erosion, because you'll save the lives when there's a flood. So the background is a little bit of what's there right now, and how it's going to be so much better after not necessarily what you do to help the owner, but what the owners do. So the world is going to be a better place with this project. What does that do? Well, that, again, it's not talking about engineering much here, but the world is going to be a better place if this bridge or this erosion, and what are you doing? You're covering a little bit of the social, economic, and pragmatic parts of a project. So you're doing that, which indirectly is part of our ABIT accreditation, is to teach you guys more about our social and economic from projects. But it gives you the opportunity, the background, why it's so important for this project and why these owners are such good people. The city of, I'm not sure what city you're in, but the country of Georgia, they've got it so together because they're doing this project because they heard people, and this is so important for this reason, this reason, this reason. Again, not a lot of engineering in this, but you're doing your part to explain why this project is so important to the world and the country of Georgia or whatever area you're in. All right, so that's the background. Again, I haven't gotten into much engineering, have I? And the important thing to remember is that the background, because you've now explained all of why it's so needed, sets up the purpose and objective. Well, because people can't get to the other side of this river, but save that for your purpose and objective. Okay, so that's a good takeaway right there. See the background and the green. Okay. So now the purpose and objective. The purpose and objective, now you start getting close to why you were hired. Now it's important that, now this is an important distinction, and I'm not sure if I explained this that well in past semesters because students sometimes confuse what I'm saying, is this now starts getting into why you were hired. You've already explained the background and kind of the importance of the project in the background. The purpose and objective is actually, I should put the word "your" in front of that. So now you get into why you were hired. Now you start moving away from why the project was so needed. This is more starts talking about why you are still needed. Okay, so you play an important part of this project. I'll use the bridge scenario again. If we're doing a bridge, we've already stated why the bridge is needed, but now you're hired, and this is important, to do the civil engineering for the landings, the structural engineering for the bridge. You're not hired to do all the other things like the way the bridge looks or the architecture of the bridge. There's a lot of things. So this is where you start drilling down on why you were hired. Now, this is very important because remember I said there's 2 different executive summaries, or 5 different, but there's the executive summary for your entire project. So in that executive summary, you're going to state all of those disciplines you were hired to do. But when you do an individual study, which we stated it does have its own executive summary, if you're the structural engineer, you're not explaining the purpose of the project, the objective, you're not doing that. You're explaining that you are doing the structural. That's so, I don't know how to make that more clear than I tend to be redundant, but when you're in your study and you're doing a sewer study, state why you were hired for the sewer study. In that study, you were hired to size the pipes. You were hired to calculate how much sewer flows. For the executive summary for the whole project, you were hired to do sewer, water, erosion, construction, all of those. Okay, so so it's also an opportunity to say what you're expecting to provide and what you could potentially find. So you're kind of teasing a little bit. But those 2 check marks aren't as important as the first one. State why you were hired. Now, here's the good news. It's not very hard because the owner already told you why they were hiring you. So don't overthink it. It's a chance for you to restate what they asked, what they're hiring you to do. It's in the RFP. So the RFP that we provided you, start putting it right here. Put it in your own words a little bit. Maybe put something the owner didn't think about, because the owner doesn't know engineering like you do. That's why they hired you. They can't do what you do. So when they tell you to do a geotechnical study, you can tell them maybe what they might not have done. So the point is to stick to why you were hired. That is your, I should actually add that in here in this PowerPoint. I should have it come in later. Your purpose and objective. I think I'm going to write that down for my next time I present on this. Add your, and have it fade in. That would be a cool animation. So what is the purpose and objective setup? Well, it's important to save the actual findings for the findings sections. So remember I mentioned a hint or a tease. That's where you can mention those second 2 check marks. It's not quite as critical, but don't start stating your findings in your purpose. Save those for the findings section. So this kind of sets up. So if you notice, each section kind of puts a teaser into the next section. Okay, so now we'll cover the findings. Now this is so funny because this is an important clarification I'm making with findings, because this is often confused. And then one of the reasons it's confusing is because engineers are really smart and they're really technical. And what does that make them often do? It makes them overthink. Okay, we tend to engage our brain before we realize the simplicity of complexity. The simplicity of findings is what you found. What you found. It was not what you calculated. We tend to start going into the calculations. So be brief, keep it interesting as much as you can, But think of what the owner wanted or did not want to find. I'll give you some examples. It's exactly, it's with, I'll use the example of a fault. You might have stated on your purpose and objective, remember the slide before, you might have stated that, you know, we will look for our scope, our purpose is to check to see if there's any faults, and we could potentially find faults. That's the T's, what you could find, that's on that other slide. This is what you did find. It isn't what you calculated. And that's a distinction. Notice how calculate is in red and find is in green, because we tend to say statements like, we found that the site will need a new sewer system. That's not a finding. That's actually a recommendation that came from calculations, that came from much engineering, because you can't just make a statement like you need a new sewer system on your site without calculation. That's what they're actually hiring you to do. Directly, they're not hiring to do findings. They are not hiring you to do findings. Findings is setting you up to do the calculation. So don't put in your findings, and this is the thing, it's not any recommendations or calculations. You don't put in your findings. We found that the storm drain on site is too small. That's an analysis. You found that the existing storm drain is 12-inch. You found that there is no storm drain next to the site. You found that you could say you found that there was a fault, because that is a finding. So that's an important distinction. Okay, so what does it set up? It only includes what you found. And it's not your opinion, because your opinion is really why you were hired. Okay, so that's that. You notice how it's setting up for the recommendations. My computer's a little slow here. Okay, so let's talk about recommendations. So you state all you found it. We found the topos here. It's all your existing conditions. That sets up the recommendations. Now is when you start making, showing your value. Now is all that other stuff that was kind of setting is you need to do those almost for you more than anybody else. The recommendations is what you are doing with all of that stuff you found, all the calculations. So once you have your findings, you have all the information that you have, then you start doing your analysis. You're a structural engineer, you're going to start, you found a certain type of soil there that's not very good. So your recommendations are a deep pile foundation, or at least your geotech recommended, right? So that's a recommendation, right? So this is an opportunity to let your owner know what your thoughts are. That's actually what you're getting paid for more directly. What are your thoughts? What are your analysis? If you could just jump to that and give it to the owner, then you'd do it, but you can't because there's engineering involved. So you do provide advice in the recommendations. It's based on your findings and analysis. Findings are what you found. Analysis is that calculations, that analysis of all the stuff that, all the information you found. In the executive summary, you limit your advice for the owner's major decisions. Okay, so going back to the model that we said is that each of the studies has an executive summary, right? And they have analysis and all that, but they each have an executive summary. Your entire project has an executive summary. So how do you know what to take from those 5 different studies that you do, a sewer study, a water study, a structural study, a geotechnical study, all those studies that you were hired? How do you know what information from those to pull all the way up to the top, to the executive summary of the entire project? Well, it's pretty subjective. So I would just have to give you some rules of thumb. Are that you usually pull up information that are those hot button or red items that in a sense. Remember we said what the owner may want to know, but may not want to know. It's a little bit of a don't shoot the messenger mentality. Is we're hired, look, we're good guys, we're trying to protect you as an owner. But we did find a fault. Okay, so don't shoot the messenger. We found a fault on your site. And you could say the fault has not been active for more than 20,000 years. So we've deemed that fault as not active. An owner's going to want to know that. They're going to know because they were kind of sweating on buying the property or moving forward the property. Or you say this fault was active, less than 1,000 years ago, and we've deemed it to be active. So you would pull that up because it's a major issue for the owner. You would not pull a recommendation up from a sewer analysis because you look at your sewer analysis, and your sewer analysis recommends that the pipes on the site should be 12 inches and you should have 12 cleanouts. That's the recommendations of the sewer study. I would not pull that up to an executive summary for the owner to make decisions. What would I on a sewer study? Well, if that sewer study says there's not an existing sewer line within a mile of your site, and you're going to have to build a mile of off-site sewer line to make your project work, I would pull that to the front. Okay, so it sounds a little bit curt, but money is usually what owners have to make their decisions. Sometimes they don't have enough money for the project. So we've got to put our owner's hat on. So that's why I can't answer you what you should bring up or what you shouldn't bring up. I can just try to teach you to fish instead of, give you a fish. So my teaching you to fish is think like an owner. What are they going to be really, really, really disappointed to find? Because you got to let them know. Or what are they going to be really pleased to find? Because they were really sweating that. Okay. So that's the rule of thumb, or what to bring up to the master executive summary. The executive summaries in the individual studies, those can be pretty boring. You know what I mean? Just give them what you recommend for those particular items. Okay. A structural recommendation maybe to do, well, I gave you the example of the deep pile foundation. If they didn't expect to do deep pile foundations, they expected just a mat foundation, I would pull that to the front. Okay, because it's money and they may not have enough money for the project. Okay, so here's a tip that I can give you. And this is more for your career, admittedly, than this project. This is more for your career. Important tip right here is that make sure there are no surprises. How do you do that? Well, you do that because by talking to your owner with that bad news or that recommendation before you hit print. This is more for your career, okay? I'll give you an example of a project. I've had this happen several times. We were doing a bridge. We were doing an analysis at the city of Coronado to get pedestrians from one side of a busy road to the other side of the road. We were studying the tunnel versus an overpass, okay? Well, it was much cheaper to do an overpass bridge. And our studies and recommendations, because we're just left-brained engineers, we thought our recommendations are going to be to do the overpass. It's cheaper. The bicycles will get a nice little view when they go over this. Well, I called up the city engineer and I said, I think we're leaning this way. It wasn't a black or white, but and he said, Jim, we can't do that. Why? You just hired me. You paid me a lot of money, Ed, to do this study. And we looked at it. He said, you have no idea the uproar in my city. There would be, if you put an overpass, you're going to block the views of 50 homes. I didn't know that. I'm a dumb engineer. I just told them that one would be a little bit less expensive and the bicyclers would get a good view. So we made the recommendation to do a tunnel, and we justified it. It wasn't, the cost wasn't that much. It was a little bit more expensive, but we were able to put that in our justification that as dumb engineers, I wouldn't have known. We said the overpass, one of the disadvantages is it blocks views. So if I would have hit print and given that to the owner, it would have gone to his council, would have gone to his mayor, and we still would have reversed it. We still would have gone with the other recommendation on the, because you're always going to revise your submittal, right? I mean, that always happens, even if they agree with you. You're going to have a couple of submittals in the study. There should be no surprise. So that's a lesson for your career. Always kind of give your owner an idea. We're going with alternative number 3. Is this good? What do you think? Is this good? Is this good? Okay, so that's a career. That's a little bit of career advice right there. Okay. Okay, so what's in the conclusion of these studies, of these technical writing? Well, the conclusion is your overall findings and comprehensive. You notice that's italicized. I should have put that in green. Your overall findings and comprehensive recommendation. So it is your big picture advice. Okay, so once you've written these and you've written, you know, that there's not a fault on the site, and you do have deep pile foundations, which is not great, but you do. Your overall findings are an opportunity for you to say, basically, you take all the studies that you put, all those recommendations, and there's no deal killer. You are not the owner, so you can't make a go, no go decision, but you can give your overall recommendation from an, now this is important, my next words, from an engineering perspective. Okay, so you don't have the money they do, but you think, you know, there's your overall chance to say, you know, after careful analysis of the engineering studies, these are not significant to a development of this size. Very subjective, but, and again, I can't give you the fish. I can teach you the fish is when you're writing these, think of the owner's go, no go decision. You can't really go wrong on this because it is, but this is, it's your best chance to show your value too, because what that does a little bit is that moves you, and this is, again, I'll preface, this is more career advice. If you do a good job on your conclusion, you've moved into the next step of being a consultant, and that's not being an engineer. That's becoming the owner's trusted advisor. There's a book right there. It's a great book. When you've moved into the trusted advisor role, and this is more career advice, because why? It's that third check mark. You think of the owner from the owner's perspective. And if you become that trusted advisor, they are going to call you for reasons other than engineering. Trust me. They'll call you to find a good landscaper for their yard at home. But this is your chance to show that value. A little bit of just kind of career advice on that one. Okay, so I've gone through each of those sections of what's in the technical writing of a narrative, right? So now I'm going to go over figures, exhibits, and plans and try to make some distinctions between them. Admittedly, some of this is subjective, but I always try to do, as I stated, I believe is we always try to think, what would industry do? Okay, we've heard of what would Jesus do? In this class, it's always, I always think, what would industry do? So it's a little bit subjective, but I'm going to talk a little bit about figures, exhibits, and plans, and where they fit into a technical and where they're appropriate for technical writing. Okay. So you see the figures and the tables in green, the exhibits in green, the plans in green, all good. So figures and tables support narratives. I'm just going to say it. Exhibits support studies, plans supports construction. All right, so what do I mean by that? Well, your figures and tables, those are often embedded in text. Okay, so I'll talk about this on the next slide a little bit, but figures and tables support the narrative of text. They're kind of embedded. You've seen kind of wraparound text sometimes. Engineers don't do that a whole lot. They should do it a little bit more, kind of wraparound text. And you're reading. And certainly if you're having a figure and you're using a figure to help the narrative, you shouldn't have that figure 2 pages later. Right? So it should be very close to the narrative that you're putting in. And please remember this rule or guideline. You should never have a figure or exhibit or anything in a study that is not referenced in the narrative. Because if you don't, it's just it's just filler. Okay, so figures and tables to support that narrative, okay? Exhibits support studies. So of course the narrative is in a study, right? So you have figures and tables that support a narrative. Exhibits support the studies. And those more often than not are in the back of the study. They're not embedded, and there's some subjectiveness here. Exhibits are not embedded in narratives or even within the technical writing of it. It's usually in the back. They're still referenced. So you would say, you're writing a narrative and you'd say, see figure 1 or see table 1 right next to the narrative. Exhibits, you would say, and we've done the hydrology analysis, and this can be seen on the tributary area map. See exhibit, because they don't need to see that. It's much bigger and it's usually a bigger exhibit. One of the most important distinctions is that exhibits and figures are not plans. That sounds like something that doesn't need to be said, but I've been doing this class for 10 years now, and I know it needs to be said. So plans support construction. That's that lowest exhibit there. See, now these are these are figures right here because they're in a PowerPoint. That lowest figure is a figure of a plan. That sounds confusing, but that's a plan. So a plan is what people build. Plans and drawings are both the same thing. I should put that in here too. Plans and drawings. Plans and drawings are what people build, okay? So that's distinction to how these images, because these are all kind of images, how they fit into technical narratives and studies. Okay, so let's go on the next page. There's a little bit of a delay. So now we're going to talk about, okay, so remember I said the last 2 or 3 slides. Okay, here's the tips and tricks, the best I can do for tips and tricks. These are where I try to do my best to dumb it down, right? So I'm not the smartest guy in the room, that's for sure. Mark, don't say anything. But I'll try my best to make this to simplify at the risk of oversimplifying. So here's some tips and tricks with technical writing. Technical writing is almost the opposite of writing for novels. This is not a once upon a time. Okay, so technical writing is almost, you flip novel writing on its head. It's almost the opposite, and I'll explain how. When you're reading a book, you'll read 40 pages and then it'll have an image. And so the narratives of a book, of a novel, are supported by some pictures, some images. Flip it on its head. Technical writing, the pictures, the tables, the those are supported by the narratives. So the narratives are shorter. That's the good news, right? The narratives are shorter because they're always pointing to these figures and exhibits. You've heard a picture is worth 1,000 words, I'm sure. I'm not sure if that's in Georgian culture, and I apologize, I don't know Georgian culture like I should, but I will. I'm going to learn a lot. I've been studying actually Georgia. I'm fascinated by some of your history actually. But a picture is worth 1,000 words. So whereas, you know, when you're reading a book, you're there for most cases the pleasure of writing. You're usually laying in a hammock on vacation. Your purpose is to read, you're enjoying it. For technical writing, it's functional. you want to make a point. So you're showing them a table, and then there's a little bit of a narrative telling them the usefulness of that table. So you flip it on its head. The pictures, there's more pictures, images, and the narratives are shorter. And that goes to the second little bullet there. I'll go for the first bullet in a second. You have to make the assumption that people do not like to read, at least not this type. Now, there may be some, maybe I offended a few people that love to read. I'm sure there are people that love to read. I love to read on vacation. But think of it as they've got, think of it as a little bit more that they don't like to read, but they don't have enough time to, because you've just given them 400 pages of technical, and they've got 3 of those to read. So if you make that assumption, and I'll come back to that, then it'll help you. I should have gone to the first bullet here, is you have to know who your reader is. Okay. So when you're technical writing, what do I mean by that? Know who your reader is. Well, in more cases than not, your reader is not as technical as you. I use that phrase again. So you need to write it for your reader. Cut to the chase. You need to, as respectfully used, dumb it down. You need to write it down to who your owner is. Know who your reader is. You cannot write it sounds odd, but you can't write a technical paper if your reader is not technical. So the brilliance of a technical writer is making the very complicated, remember that second slide? Making the very complicated simple. The best writer can do that. Know your owner. That means cut to the chase. Show them the picture. Show them the image. Show them the results right away. You need deep piles. Assume that they don't have, that they don't necessarily have time to read. And then think visually. Notice how I have the word tell and I crossed it out. Don't tell your story. Show your story. Use bullets. Use images. Don't think of it as visual is not just pretty. It does make it a little better. Wouldn't you rather read the one on the right? If you were to look at the images on the right or left, which one would you rather read? The one on the left, they both are very technically accurate. Certainly the one on the right is certainly prettier, but it's not just about, it's also functional. Why is it more functional? Because it's scannable. Make it scannable. So prompt the reader. How do you make it scannable? We'll go on that on the next slide, but think of to make it scannable, you prompt the reader to read backwards. So how do you prompt the reader to read backwards? That sounds ridiculous. I always tell my class, make it so they read like I read a wine list. I look at the price of the wine and then I order my wine. So I'm not exactly an expert in wine. But how do they read backwards? Well, you use make it pop. Use subheadings, bolding, underlining. But what do I mean by read backwards? Because what people do, if they don't have time to read everything, so they'll look at what you bolded and they think deep Powell foundations. Then they'll read the sentence in front of it. What the heck is this guy or girl talking about? What is this person talking about? Deep, what's this nonsense? So you make it pop, you underline, you bullet, you indent. So they will scan it and they'll look for the bolds. That's why you should always bold when you call out your figures and your exhibits, bold it, exhibit C, because then they'll see what your exhibit C is for and they'll go to exhibit C. So they'll scan it for the bold. You'll see this written in lots of sports pages, and as they'll bold like the name of the player, or they'll do certain things. And it really makes it much easier for them to go to the important points and then read what that important point was. Okay. And I can tell you, I've actually been hired as an owner's agent to provide evaluations on submittals. And they usually pay me about 30 minutes to scan it, to read each one, and it takes 2 hours almost. So I don't have time to read the whole. By the way, I usually put in more time because I don't read very fast and I like to do a good job. But those submittals that make everything hard to see, if I can't find it, Might as well not exist. And that's just the brutal reality of it. So make it pop. Use subheadings. I'll provide you feedback on your proposals and things like that. And I'll say, hey, bold, do a little more bolding here. Yeah, it's a little bit subjective, but and you don't have to do what I'm saying, but I'm trying to give you advice on how to make it pop. When in doubt, paragraph it. What do I mean by that? Well, the Navy, who I work for a lot, and I love the Navy, but imagine the executive summary on the right, on the, well, it's my left. Maybe you're right. If that was just one paragraph, it's the opposite of making things pop. If you have long paragraphs, it is hard to just take in. It's just overwhelming if you just have one long paragraph. So when in doubt, paragraph it. So if you're ever thinking, should I make a new paragraph here? If you're ever thinking that, paragraph it. So it's kind of, I don't know, Georgians have much baseball over there. There's a term here that says tie goes to the runner. If you're ever just thinking that you should probably break it in paragraphs, go ahead and break it in paragraphs. You really can't do wrong. The other trick, again, to kind of teach you to fish is make the last, if you've kind of having trouble deciding where should I, they said maybe break this up a little bit. Where should I break it up? I don't know. A good rule of thumb is to try to figure out where a sentence where you want to have an important sentence, end it there in paragraph, because again, people scan, a lot of times they read the last paragraph. So that's just a little tip to help you decide, where should I break it? I've already decided it's too long, I need to break it, but I don't know where. Look for that last hard hitting point and then break it right there. Just a rule of thumb, not a rule at all, a rule of thumb, a guide. Okay, so, all right, so just wrapping things up here. The last tip or trick is don't ramble. Notice that's in red. I love this quote by Abraham Lincoln. And in the future, I'm going to find some Georgian leaders to quote. But use short and precise sentences. Abraham Lincoln said, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. So if you know what you're doing, and it's a challenge because you're learning a lot of this material, and respectfully, a lot of you don't know what you're doing because you're learning this material. It's hard not to just start writing and rambling. If you read, you'll see the people that really know what they're doing and really know their material, because then they can be precise and concise. Hard-hitting points, what really needs to be heard. So this one admittedly is a little bit harder to do at the undergraduate level because you're learning the material. But just know in your future that, as you become more confident in what you're doing, you can probably shorten your writing and get to the point and be precise and concise. And so that's an important lesson probably for your career in that. And the good news is with technical writing, remember I said earlier, it's more that you're more talking about the images, the tables. This table shows this. You can kind of trim every time that you can point to a figure, you can do a little less writing. Write a sentence, point, write 2 sentences more, point. Okay. So that is technical writing. We talked a little bit about, the technical writing, where it fits in studies, how executive summaries are in every study in some form. Every study has a summary, and your entire project has a summary. And we talked about the 5 typical sections, but not absolute. Then we did talk about figures, exhibits, and plans and where they fit into technical writing, and then some tips and tricks. I would give you one last tip and trick that I did not mention, was that sometimes recommendations and conclusions, it can be kind of fuzzy on where you draw. What's a recommendation? But isn't that kind of your conclusion? Not a big deal. You can just combine those sometimes. Often I'll see, and I've done it, when if I don't have a hard hitting conclusion, my last section will be recommendations and conclusions. Okay, because there's concluding things in your recommendations. So that's a little tip there. If you just combine those two, there's nothing wrong with that. So I will, actually, I already did. I posted a bunch of examples of deliverables, okay? I'll check to make sure that has that middle frame, that executive summary right there. The top and the bottom image would be in the deliverables sections of examples that we're giving you, because that's a study on top and that's a drawing and a plan on the bottom. In the middle, that's the executive summary that I'm talking about this entire. I'll have to check to see if that's there. I don't think it would be in the deliverables folder. That would probably be in shared resources, but I'll try to make sure that you have that. And I want to just say one more thing before I conclude. And I'm not just saying this, but Mark experienced this as well. I have to tell you, I was very much with my team. I can only speak for my team. I was impressed with your writing. Your writing was good. I'm assuming that English is not your first language, and your writing was really good and thought through. So kudos to that. I was really pleased and proud. So with that said, we're at the, oh my goodness, we only have 5 more minutes. I'm sorry, I meant to give 10 minutes for questions. Are there any questions that came in or that you have? I only have 5 minutes, and I apologize for that. We started 5 minutes late. Any questions that you have? And we'll post this PowerPoint as well. Go ahead.
Nothing on chat yet.
Okay. Okay. Can you guys see that dialog box? It just popped up on me, that one in the lower corner. It says join this meeting. Okay, if there's no questions, I'm going to let you go. We'll post this PowerPoint and we'll get the recording too for those that might not have made it. And hopefully that helps you with your technical writing and simplifies usually pretty hard writing, difficult writing. Okay. So with that said, I will stop sharing and then hopefully I know how to end the recording. Thanks for everybody that attended, and we'll talk soon. Here it is.
See you, Jim.
All right. Thanks, everyone.